One of my favorites. Love having him on. He makes me smarter from Sports Illustrated, joining us here to also explain why Ohio State's sending quarterbacks to the next level, feeling robotically penned in by things like reads and progressions. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Albert?
Did you catch the Texans game on Sunday?
That's true. He did look. He is looking good. CJ Stroud looks comfortable, Albert. He does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they're very different players. It's interesting from the same place, but very, very different players, obviously.
All right, that's my churlish way of beginning our conversation. What happened in Chicago yesterday? Let's start with Justin Fields. First, Albert.
I would say it's interesting because I do think he was blown a little out of proportion, because I think if you read the tweet that kind of blew up, you thought one thing, and it got my attention because I was like, God, that doesn't sound like Justin, And then I went back and I watched what he actually said, and it wasn't really where he just said coaching is the problem. It was more, I have a lot going on in my head right now. There's a lot rattling around up there while I'm standing in the pocket, and coaching is part of that. What sort of coaching, how much coaching I'm getting, and I want to go back and get to a place where I can play fast and free again. And so, what I can tell you about the internal handling of that is things really blew up while they were in the practice field. And so the Bears are out there practicing. Everybody's going nuts over this on Twitter. They get back in. Justin gets to his locker, looks at his phone, sees the world is melting down about what he said at his press conference, immediately ran to Luke Getsy, their offensive coordinator's office, and they talked it out. Those two have a really good relationship. And there wasn't even really anything that needed to be squashed, I guess, because there wasn't a problem in the first place. But Justin did apologize, and they were able to move on really quickly. Now, that said, let's talk about the root of this, right? The tape is really bad. And I've heard that from people with teams that are on the Bears schedule, that have played the Bears. The tape isn't good. And there's a lot that needs to be solved there. And in Justin's comments, there's a lot to chew on. I just think the whole idea that he was pointing the finger was misplaced to begin with and taken care of quickly internally.
Well, what he did say, because I didn't see the tweet at first. I heard the soundbite at first. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and the way I took it to mean is that the coaching is an impediment. That is the way I took it to mean. And if, just to be consistent, that if I'm going to sit here and roast Zach Wilson last year for sounding as if he's not responsible for letting the locker room down, and him saying, well, why are you playing robotically? And his answer is coaching. Well, maybe that's a way of saying I'm not, taking understanding the coaching or processing the coaching, or I'm letting the coaching getting in my head too much, which is a him problem. That's not a Getsy problem. And what Getsy is trying to do, just to continue this conversation, I imagine, is to keep Justin Fields upright and in the pocket. And the faster he gets comfortable and not feeling robotic, standing in the pocket and running the plays as they're schemed, the better for him. But I'm just wondering, after what he said, that maybe you just go to him and just say, let's throw everything out that makes you feel robotic and keep everything in that doesn't, and seeing what happens in Kansas City. And now I give you the floor back on that supposition.
Yeah, I think there are two things to look at here, Rich. Number one, they felt like they needed him to be Superman last year, and they don't feel like they need him to be Superman anymore. The roster was in such disrepair last year. They were carrying all the dead cap. They were trying to make it work with not much in front of him. They were, I'd say, deficient at receiver also. There wasn't much they did well on offense last year. So if they were going to win last year, they felt like Justin Fields had to be Superman. And so they played that way. And the second piece of it is they don't think that playing the way they did last year is sustainable. And I think Justin Fields' injuries, the way his body was at the end of the year, is proof positive of that. That might look good in the short term, but that's not going to be something that's going to be sustainable over years for the franchise. So, you look at that part of it, and then you got to juxtapose it against what, a traditional NFL quarterback does, and, in maybe the Brady Manning sense, and Justin's really far from being that. So, how do you find the happy medium? And this is a guy who, coming out, like what Ryan Day and the coaches at Ohio State all said was he just needs reps. He needs to play more. He needs to see more. He hasn't seen enough. And he doesn't see it fast enough right now. And so, like, how do you kind of find that happy medium between what you want him to be ultimately, which he's not that right now, and what he's really good at and can do right now? And I think, like a huge part of this, when you're adding Darnell Wright in the draft and you're adding DJ Moore in a trade, is like, how do we find that happy medium in doing what Justin does well, continuing to grow him as a player and getting the most out of the players we've put around him? And clearly the Bears have struggled with that a little bit, and I think you can see it watching Justin. I mean, look, there was a point at Ohio State, between when they had J.K. Dobbins and between when Trey Sermon went nuts at the end of his last year, they had trouble running the ball. And you could see when the running game was taken away from him and when they weren't running the ball as well as a team, he'd stand there in the pocket and it was almost like he would doubt what he was looking at. And they were good enough around him where they could protect him in those situations, and he had open guys to throw to. In the NFL, it's a little more challenging when everything's talent equated, and now you don't have that extra second to sit in the pocket and hold the ball. And so, they either need to find a way to help him see it faster or simplify things on him. And that's all going to be a process. But, I certainly think they feel better about the team around him. They feel better about the offense than they did a year ago, as bad as it looked through 2 weeks. And, it feels almost like moving away from what they did last year to make it work with Justin, to make it work for the players they had on the team last year. It's almost like they're, sort of hitting the reset button and starting over again on offense. And they're going through some obvious bumps and getting to where they need to be.
Well, it seems like they just got to hit the reset button for the entire organization right now, Albert, because that wasn't just the only thing that happened at Halas Hall yesterday. I mean, Braxton Jones, their left tackle, goes on injured reserve. And the defensive coordinator, Alan Williams, announces he's leaving the team. What's your reporting on the defensive coordinator with all the craziness that's swirling around over the circumstances of his departure, Albert?
Well, number one, the FBI was not at the Bears facility yesterday. Number two, like the coaches were told that the very worst stuff that you saw on the internet was not true. So you can take those two things at face value for what it's worth. That's what the coaches were told. The FBI wasn't there. The coaches were told the very worst that we've seen on the internet is not true. That said, like in talking to some people in that building, the phrase "effing crazy," I tweeted this yesterday, was brought up to me about the circumstance. And I had somebody say to me, you've coached with a guy for a number of years and you think you know him, and then this happens. So there's still a lot of mystery over it. I wouldn't jump to any conclusions, but clearly it's not very good. And, it's amazing when you think about it, Rich, I hate to call anything unprecedented. I was just on the radio here and somebody was asking, is this as crazy, like a little stretch as you've seen for a team in the NFL? I'm like, well, my default is to think back to the week that Ray Rice and Greg Hardy and Adrian Peterson all happened, within a few days, but that was with different teams, to have your defensive coordinator resign and then your offensive coordinator be under this kind of fire in the same day is a lot. And it's going to be really interesting to see what becomes of it, because obviously, on the other end of this, they have the Super Bowl champions waiting for them in Kansas City on Sunday.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. We started by talking about C.J. Stroud a little bit. It looks like he's the only rookie quarterback who might answer the bell on Sunday. What's going on with Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson in their readiness for this weekend that you may have?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously it's very cut and dry with Anthony Richardson. He's either going to clear the protocol or he's not. And until we see him, back in the practice field, it's, obviously the Colts are under, a very strict protocol as far as what they can do with him. And I mean, I think it's, Bryce Young to come out of this, and be injured after 2 weeks, whether he plays or plays on Sunday or not, Rich, goes back to the whole question about his size. And I hate to do it, but it's you can see it every time he drops back there. The question with his size, and what's so interesting about it to me is it was never about whether or not he could see. And with most short quarterbacks, it is, because that is a real issue. But I remember talking to Frank Reich about this, and he was like, when he would stand, one of the reasons he felt so comfortable going with him from the jump was like, he would stand behind him in the spring and the summer and see the field the same way the quarterback would. He'd stand behind the offense, and he'd be like, this guy has no trouble seeing anything. So it was never height with him. It was more his frame and how he could hold up. And it's not the greatest sign in the world and the line hasn't played great in front of him. That's certainly a factor. Both his starting guards are out, and the tackles haven't played as well as they played a year ago. But the fact that he's already nicked up isn't the greatest sign. And so I know they're going to try to get him ready for Sunday, but missing practice time for a rookie is a big deal.
And then obviously Andy Dalton would be the guy to go in Seattle if he can't go. And it's the latest example for my friends in the New York metropolitan area who are already infuriated with Zach Wilson. No one's going to flip the Jets their backup quarterback right now. I mean, that's just not going to happen. I'm still wondering what your reporting is on what the Jets are thinking in that building right now. I mean, does Joe Douglas have a list that he's ready to pounce on when he can? Or are they privately as bullish on Wilson as they are publicly? What do you got for me, Albert?
So they want to give him runway. They want to get behind him, and I think that's why you saw the public declarations over the last couple of weeks. And I do think there's like a genuine feel that like they want to make it, they want to make it work with him, they want to do it with him. And I can say like the feeling was like he's coming into this in a much different context, right, than what he was the last 2 years. Like his first year, there wasn't a lot around him because the team was being retooled under a new head coach. And then, last year they're trying to figure out if he's a franchise quarterback or not. So they're asking him to do some things that probably are more than they need him to do now. Now, with a really good running game with Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall, and if you get the tackle situation figured out, you can have a really good running game. And obviously, they have a potentially dominant defense that's super athletic and has franchise players in Quentin Williams and Sauce Gardner. You kind of can say, put your hands at 10-2, kid, and keep the car on the road, right? The problem with that is that's never been Zach Wilson's game. And in fact, like the criticism of him coming out of BYU was that he too often passed up the layups, and he would make these big, exciting plays. But some teams looked at it and said, well, like there's this guy here and this guy here and this guy here. He didn't need to hold the ball. He didn't need to run around. And so can you rewire him, or would it even be conducive to getting the most out of him to rewire him to be a game manager? Because it does feel to me, and I don't know, you watch them as close as anyone, Rich, like they could kind of use a game manager right now, right? And so I think that's the question and that's sort of where I think they're stuck in between, where it's like this team kind of needs a steadying presence, a game manager, and that's never been Zach Wilson's game. Can they make him that? And is it even the right idea to make him that? Because you can't go through another year where he's playing the way that he did last year, and you can't risk it with the roster that you have. And if you have any prayer of getting Aaron Rodgers back, like you want everything you can just get to 9 or 10 wins so you can get in the dance. That's the question they're going to be asking themselves over the next 5 or 6 weeks. And they're going to give him some runway, and they have given him some runway. But if it looks like it did against Dallas, and Dallas has got a great defense, so maybe that's not the best context to look at it in. I mean, 5-6 weeks from now, you get close to the trade deadline. There are going to be teams that are going to be 1-6, that are going to be 2-5, that are going to be looking at it and saying, maybe we do need to offload some pieces, or maybe that backup quarterback isn't as important to us. So I think that this is going to ultimately come down to how Zach Wilson plays. And then if Zach Wilson doesn't play, the sort of opportunity that becomes available because of the way other teams play.
Any word if Rodgers is part of the game planning on the phone with Wilson, in a meeting with Hackett via Zoom, FaceTime, anything, Albert?
I'm gonna look into that for you, because it isn't something that I had necessarily thought of, and I'll get back to you on that. But it is something, honestly, it is something, Rich, that the relationship that Zach and Aaron have is a genuine relationship. It's one that pre-exists their time as teammates. It's one that was a facilitator in Zach staying on the roster after they traded for Aaron Rodgers. And I may have told you this story before, but after Zach Wilson's first start, and I don't think he played real well, if I remember the story right, he comes back the next week, and that Friday night, it was, I think, 8 or 9 p.m. and Zach's at the facility, and Aaron calls him, and they start talking, and Aaron just says like, well, wait a minute, like, where are you right now? And Zach says, I'm at the facility. And Aaron's like, dude, what the hell are you doing there? Get out of there. Like, it's Friday night. You don't need to be there. Get out of there. Like, you're overdoing it. So they had that sort of relationship, which would facilitate Aaron helping Zach now. And so I would think that Aaron would be helping Zach every way he can. I just can't say definitively whether or not it's happened over the last week and a half.
Couple minutes left with Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. All right, Albert, the text you got from Jim Irsay, fresh off of his bus back in training camp days. It serves to bring it up again with Jonathan Taylor. We're not trading Jonathan. End of discussion. Not now on July 29th and not in October. It is September. I guess you can kind of shoehorn September in there as a possibility for a loophole, Albert. Yep. He's coming off a pup in about, 10 days? What's the state of affairs right there in Indy?
I think that they would have to consider offers on him, and I think the relationship is such where I think Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen really wanted to make it work. I think what the handling of the last month and a half have proven to all of us is that at the level above those guys, the relationship might be irreparable. And it's like one very intelligent coach told me once, like, about the advice that he gives to younger coaches is when you're looking at head coaching jobs, remember the one thing you can't change is the owner. So like, I would say, like, they're going to get phone calls, and that's just the way it works. Everybody calls about everything. So they're going to get phone calls on Jonathan Taylor ahead of the trade deadline. And I would think that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are going to at least listen to those phone calls. And the same way, like, I think the Giants, if things don't go well over the next few weeks, might have to start listening on Saquon Barkley. I think the Giants have to look at, I think the Colts would have to look at it realistically and say, if this guy's not going to be on our team for the next 3 years and somebody's offering us, say, a second round pick and something else, then that's something we seriously have to consider. And I look at like a couple teams, like, can you imagine that Miami offense with Jonathan Taylor in it? Can you imagine what Buffalo would look like with Saquon Barkley? Like, there are teams out there that could look at it and say, look at what Christian McCaffrey did for San Francisco last year. Like, they made it to the NFC Championship game despite like a really sideways quarterback situation. And one of the reasons why is because that McCaffrey elevated them. I certainly think like some teams could look at a Taylor or a Barkley that way when we get to October.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. That's an interesting food for thought right there, Albert Breer. Any Deion effect conversations you're hearing in the pros? I'm serious. And in the pros at all? Too soon or not at all? Or everyone must be seeing what he's doing in Colorado and talking about it, Albert, right?
Well, let me take you through a few names, okay? Uh-huh. What do you think of the job Mike Vrabel's done?
Great.
What do you think of the job Dan Campbell's done?
I see where you're going.
What do you think of the job Kevin O'Connell's done?
Okay. I see.
You think D'Amico Ryans has great potential as a head coach?
I see what you're saying. So plug.
And I think the Jeff Saturday thing was probably like a bridge too far, as far as this idea goes.
But because he took him off of off a fishing boat.
Set.
You know what I mean? or off the TV set.
But I mean, seriously, like, here's my thought on it, Rich, and this is like a broader thought, but like, when I see Deion, that video of him, like, where there was the make it personal thing, right?
Yes.
Look at every kid in that video. Where are their eyes? They are locked in on Deion Sanders, right? You have kids, I have kids. How hard is it to get that, like, this generation's attention that way? Seriously.
That's a good one. That's true.
How hard, and Deion walked into that building. He had that automatically, Rich.
Right.
You're already playing from ahead, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the way I look at this. I've told this story a couple of times over the last couple of weeks on this, but I remember having a conversation a few years ago with Mike McDaniel, and Mike is like one of the most self-aware. People don't know that about him. One of the most self-aware people you could possibly imagine. And Mike has said to me, like, I have to be the smartest guy in the room to have a chance, you know? Like the ex-players don't. And so you're playing from ahead, you know, and I do think that there's that element of it where this generation, it's really hard with this generation of player to capture the attention, the imagination of 53 of them at once. And so if you can do that the minute you walk in the door, you're playing from ahead. Now, you still have to make it work, right? You still have to prove to them that you're going to give them a good plan. You still have to prove to them that you're going to give them a plan to win as a group and to get rich individually, right? Like, you still have to do that. But like with the ex-players, like with this generation, it's like if you have name recognition and you can walk in and they know you've done it and they know you've sat in your seat. It's like I remember talking to Vrabel about this. Like Vrabel can walk in that meeting room and it's like every single guy in that meeting room, Rich, he's been them. He's been the guy trying to make the team. He's been the guy running down on kickoffs. He's been the all-pro linebacker. He's been the veteran just trying to hang on at the end. He's been every one of them. So every one of them looks at him and says, he's been me. Right? Outside of maybe the quarterbacks. So like, I think that there's a power to that, right? And you know as well as I do, because you work where I used to work. I remember walking into locker rooms with that NFL Network mic flag, Rich. Mm-hmm. And how many times have you walked in somewhere with that mic flag and you had a player say to you on the way out, tell Prime I said hello?
Every one of them. Every one of them. Every one of them. Yeah.
I mean, for one reason or another, like what I'm talking about with Vrabel and Campbell and Ryans and O'Connell, that exists to a different level with Deion. Like they revere him. Mm-hmm. So like, I think the effect is in the short term, it shows the advantage that an ex-player has. Not saying that the guys who didn't play can't do it, because obviously they can. There's a lot of proof of that. But it does show like that's an important thing. Like that's an advantage you can have if you have an ex-player in there, right? So that in the short term, that's what it is. In the long term, I mean, the question I would ask is some owner going to back up the Brinks truck for Deion Sanders?
So what it would take? Well, it would take a Brinks truck, and it would take handing the entire program off to him, because he you know, in the same way that you just mentioned about, you know, 53 guys and professionals. He even said on this show last Friday, he doesn't maybe have any interest in even attempting that he loves where he is, and he loves the kids, and he loves that style of coaching. And by the way, before I let you go, you left off one thing you missed about Vrabel, Albert, is touchdown maker in the end zone. You know,
that's right. That's right.
Don't forget
before Hopkins
red zone target before Hopkins joined the team, he led the entire organization in catches. You know,
I know.
Come on.
That's right.
Albert, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it, brother.
You got it, Rich.
That's at Albert Breer. Check him out. Check out everything he does. I do. You should as well. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.